So as we talk about the waters of life, we encounter this story of Cana and Galilee. And it's an amazing story in the way it lays out the rest of John's gospel, as we began to talk about in our Bible study last week. It takes place at a wedding, and we often read about it. When we have weddings, people want to read about the wedding at Cana of Galilee, but it doesn't really say anything about the wedding. It doesn't really say anything about marriages. It says something to us about who God is and who we are in relationship to God. So Jesus and his disciples, his newly called disciples, were at this wedding in Cana of Galilee, a small town and a small wedding, I'm sure. His mother was there, and they ran out of wine. There's nothing worse than running out of supplies before the party is over. Jesus instructs the servants to fill these stone jars. Now, stone jars are something else, right? Most of what we think about people carrying water in the ancient world is going to be pottery. The thing about pottery is it's absorbent. It absorbs what's in it. A stone jar, however, is solid, right? And so the stone jars were used for purification rituals. They were used to contain holy water. They were used to contain water that was used for extra special religious events. It was these jars that Jesus told them to fill 6 of them that hold 30 gallons of water. Now, this is the part that I think we often miss about this story as it happens. 6 jars, 30 gallons. That is 180 gallons of wine.
Wow.
Say that again, 180 gallons of wine. Now, often when good church people talk about wine and alcoholic beverages, we say moderation, 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 which is a good thing. But Jesus says, here is 180 gallons. I don't care how many people were there. That's a lot of wine. This is the first miracle that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. You know, I think we spend a lot of our lives worried about if there is enough. If there is enough in the bank account to pay the extra high utility bills this month. If there is enough to pay for the increase in price of gas in the car that I bought when gas was significantly less expensive. If there is enough for me to have more. And we think about it in terms of stuff and material stuff and all of that, but it's not just the stuff, right? Is there enough love from my parents for me, from my children for me, from my neighbors for me? Is there enough? Am I enough? Is there enough? Once in the 30s, German pastor Martin Niemöller, he's the one who said that famous quote, right? First they came for the trade unionists, but I was not a trade unionist, and so I was silent. And then they came for the socialists, and I was not a socialist, and so I was quiet. And then they came for the Jews, and I was not a Jew, and so I was quiet. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me, right? Martin Niemöller. So Martin Niemöller was among a contingent of German Lutheran pastors who had an audience with the new chancellor of the German Reich, a young man named Adolf Hitler. And walking away from that, Niemöller gave an interview. He said, I'm struck by, more than anything else, that this Chancellor Hitler is a man filled with fear. A man filled with fear. Fear drives us to so many things. And so often it's rooted in this fear that there's not enough. I'm afraid that if certain people in this country get authority, there won't be enough left for me. That if certain people in this society are protected, who will watch out for me? I'm afraid that if certain people get money and wealth in this country, there won't be enough for me. Fear drives this. Fear of not enough in particular drives our distrust of one another. Fear drives our hatreds of one another. Fear that there won't be enough. Rights, protections, wealth, supplies, prestige, respect. Take your pick. We're afraid that there's not enough. And along comes Jesus in Cana of Galilee. His first miracle, his first sign. And John calls these signs to remind us that they point toward who God is. This is a sign of who God is. God is the one who, after everybody has had enough, after everybody has had their fill, says, here's 180 gallons more of wine. Try it, you can't drink it all. Not only is there enough, there's more than you could ever want. God calls us to move out of feeling like there's not enough in the world to knowing that God will always provide more than we could ever need. Now, let me be clear. There are those pastors and preachers who might tell you that God wants you to be wealthy, and that's what the God of abundance is about. That God wants you to make sure that you have a new car in your garage, that you can move into a bigger house. That is not what I am talking about, and that is not the promise of the gospel. No, there is more than enough, however. We can move out into the world and make sure that our neighbor is fed. And there's still more than enough for us. We can go out into the world and make sure that the people we might not love, the people we might not even like, have everything they need, and there is still more than enough. Sue read for us this great story of the widow of Zarephath. Fun fact, this is one of the stories that Jesus preaches on in the Gospels. And they tried to kill him for it. Elijah shows up. It's this great story. Elijah shows up, and there's this widow and her son, and they're starving. There's a famine in the land, a drought in the land. So Elijah goes to Zarephath, which is not Israel, which in fact are the enemies of Israel, which in fact are the people that the people of Israel around Elijah's time hate, despise. And Elijah goes to Zarephath, and there's this widow. And I hope you caught it's a funny story. Because this widow is saying there, and Elijah says, bring me some food. And she goes, oh, I'm just going to go home and make some soup with these sticks. And then we're going to die. Stick soup, right? Like her dramatic resignation that there is not enough is fantastic. I'm going to go home and make stick soup, Elijah, and then I'm going to die. And Elijah says, feed me anyway. You think there's not enough for you. Feed me anyway. feed your enemy. Feed your enemy. Not just pray for your enemy, feed your enemy. And she does, and God provides. She does, and God makes sure that not only does she have enough to feed Elijah, she has enough to feed Elijah and her son and herself until the rain comes again. And the people who heard Jesus preaching this said, "How can you possibly say that God will provide for the people we hate?" And Jesus said, "That's the gospel. There is more than enough." To encounter the waters of Lent this year, the abundant living waters of Jesus Christ, is to know that God will provide. To know that we don't live in a world where there's not enough. We don't live in a world where anybody, anywhere should go hungry tonight. We don't live in a world where our neighbor should be living without a home over their heads. We don't live in a world where we should be denying the rights of people because we're afraid of them. We don't live in a world where there's not enough. We worship the God of abundance, of plenty, of more than enough, of 180 gallons of wine. This is the first sign of Jesus in Cana in Galilee, reminding us who our God is. Our God is the God of abundance. Thanks be to God.